Wonderful. We're going to record this. um, uh, we always get the question, where can this be made available? So if you go to YouTube and you type in Oakville Baha'is, you'll find the YouTube site. And then if you click on videos, it'll be there in 1 or 2 days. It'll be uploaded to the YouTube site, Oakville Baha'is. We'll record until probably the questions, and then we'll take it off recording. So you can feel free to ask your questions to the speaker. We'll go from 7 till probably just after 8. And I think Dave is going to give a presentation and then allow for difficult questions afterwards.
They have to be difficult. They're ranked.
No, I'm kidding. He likes all types of questions, even out of the box questions. So I'm just going to introduce our speaker, Dr. David Smith. Many of you already know. He is a pediatric ophthalmologist practicing for the last 50 years. He also became a Baha'i over 50 years ago. And he has served the faith both locally and internationally. And through his extensive travels and speaking engagements, he's won over the hearts of many people. And so we're really honored and thankful to have a chance to hear what he has to say. And you never know what he's going to say, because at our wedding, he gave a really lovely speech, and at one point it was getting very emotional. So he thought he'd cheer people up and ask if anyone who was not invited to the wedding to please stand up. And he made sure that if there was anyone, yeah, you wanted them to feel comfortable as well. Like you weren't, calling them out. You just wanted to have them introduce themselves. So we never know what we're going to get in an evening with Dave Smith. To begin, I think we'll start with a devotional song sung by Brett, and then we'll turn it over to you, Dave. You might know this little number over here.
At all times do I speak of you and call you to mind. I pray unto the Lord, and with tears I implore him to rain down all these blessings upon you and gladden your heart and make blissful your souls and grant you exceeding joy and heavenly delight and heavenly delights and heavenly delights, oh, and heavenly delights. At all times do I speak of you and call you to mind. I pray unto the Lord, and with tears I implore him to rain down all these blessings upon you and gladden your heart and make blissful your souls and grant you exceeding joy and heavenly delights, oh, and heavenly delights and heavenly delight, oh, heavenly delights.
with that, I'll welcome those of you who have joined most recently, and I'll turn it over to Dave. And welcome, Mame. I saw you came on as well.
Well, thanks a lot for letting me be here tonight with you all. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And this is a special time in the year for all Baha'is. As we know, it's the period of the fast, and some of you have just been able to have your meal. But the 19 days of the fast is such a special time for everyone. And I was reading something today where people who are not Baha'is want to know if they could try the fast. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, sure, you can try it for sure. It's a wonderful period of spiritual time for renewal and reviewing and rethinking and connecting with our Creator and reflecting on life and so forth. So folks, the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about this subject, about what is religion, I looked up the definition of religion, and no one has a good definition. It's a very interesting thing. The sociologists, the anthropologists, the religious thinkers, no one can sort of define it very well. In fact, some people think you shouldn't even define it, because if you can't define it, then it doesn't exist. I suppose that's what they think. But in fact, we often talk about religion in the Baha'i faith, that we're members of the Baha'i faith and it is a religion and so forth. So I became interested in this really, well, just recently again, because I don't know if some of you, when you're reading the writings or a message from the House of Justice, and for some of the friends on this tonight who may not be Baha'is, we have these beautiful Baha'i writings that we reference and we refer to and look at and try to understand and study together and so forth. And we also received extraordinary messages from the head of the Baha'i faith, the Universal House of Justice, and where they give guidance to the Baha'i community around the world, and they point out things that we could engage in and how they view the world and how we should view the world. And it's just an exciting thing. And recently, we received a message from the House of Justice, which was actually to what's called the Conference of the Continental Board of Counselors. Now, counselors are appointed by the Universal House of Justice to be a source of guidance and encouragement to the Baha'i community and to friends everywhere. And they had gathered in Haifa, Israel on the latter part of December, early January, to consult with the House of Justice and with the members of what is referred to as the International Teaching Center, which is at the World Center. And this beautiful message came out from the House of Justice to these counselors. Now, I wanted to read part of it to you because this is what really excited me about thinking about the word religion. And so I want to read part of this to you. Some of you may have already had a chance to study this message. It's the 30th of December message. And so I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to sort of make a couple of comments about it. So they're referring to the Baha'i community, which has existed now, well, ever since Baha'u'llah declared his mission, which is in 1863. But there has been a development of the Baha'i community over countless decades. And clearly the Baha'i faith now has spread around the world. And the teachings of the Baha'i faith, Baha'is do their best to share those with our friends and neighbors and those people that show any interest in it. And at the same time, the Baha'is are really dedicated towards the betterment of the world, if I could put it that way. That is really what the faith of Baha'u'llah is about. It's about promoting a better civilization, an advancing civilization, bringing new thoughts and ideas, new concepts to the civilization building in which we're all part of. So the House of Justice, referencing the Baha'is in this message, said the enkindled souls being raised up through the processes of the plan, and that's what the Baha'is are trying to carry out, the plan, are seeking to gain an ever more profound understanding of Baha'u'llah's teachings. And then they quote Baha'u'llah, the sovereign remedy for every disease. Now you might want to remember that quote, because the situation of the world today kind of indicates that there's a major disease going on in the world. And then he says, and to apply them, that's these teachings, to the needs of their society. They are committed, that's the Baha'is, to the prosperity of all, recognizing that the welfare of individuals rests in the welfare of society at large. They are loyal citizens who eschew partisanship and the contest of worldly power. Instead, they are focused on transcending differences, harmonizing perspectives, and promoting the use of consultation for making decisions. Then they go on and say this: they emphasize qualities and attitudes. Now, I can't speak for myself, but the House of Justice said this, so it must be there somewhere. He said, they emphasize qualities and attitudes such as trustworthiness, cooperation, and forbearance that are building blocks of a stable social order. They champion rationality and science as essential for human progress. They advocate tolerance and understanding, and with the inherent oneness of humanity uppermost in their minds, they view everyone as a potential partner to collaborate with, and they strive to foster fellow feeling even among groups who may traditionally have been hostile to one another. They are conscious of how the forces of materialism are at work around them, and their eyes are wide open to the many injustices that persist in the world. Yet they are equally clear-sighted about the creative power of unity and humanity's capacity for altruism. And then this is where it got me. They see the power that true religion possesses to transform hearts and overcome distrust. And so with confidence in what the future holds, they labor to cultivate the conditions in which progress can occur. Okay. So out of that's an incredible part of a paragraph. That's just part of a paragraph of the number that was shared with the friends that's meeting in Haifa, the counselors. They see the power that true religion possesses to transform hearts and overcome distrust. Okay, so I read that and I thought, well, what is true religion? Like, how would you describe this to people? What would it mean to say there is true religion versus other religion? Because it seems to me that when the founder of the faith, Baha'u'llah, came, and Baha'is recognized him as a messenger of God, as a manifestation of God, what we are seeing in his teachings is an analysis, if you want, of the situation of the world, and also a remedy, things that we can do to rectify the pathology that exists in the world today. So I wanted to read you then something from Abdul Baha. Now, you know, we just, or this year, are celebrating the 100th anniversary. Well, celebrating in one way, because he released the Will and Testament, and the wonderful document that gives the foundation of Baha'i administrative structure and so forth, but at the same time, the passing of Abdul Baha. So it's an extraordinary year. He wrote, Abdul Baha wrote to many, many people of the world during his whole ministry. And one thing he did do, he wrote to the American believers, the North American believers, on many, many occasions. Now, some of you have read the selections from the writings of Abdul Baha. It's a beautiful compilation of messages from Abdul Baha to the Baha'is of North America. Now, one, I don't know what the questions were that were asked, but the answers are extraordinary. And I'm sure the questions are all at the Holy Land, and we have them somewhere, but one doesn't have to even know the question to read the answer and get something out of it. So I wanted to read to you this answer. And someone must have written to Abdul Baha and says, what's religion? Okay, I mean, this is, I would have said this, I would have written to Abdul Baha, well, tell me what religion is. And Abdul Baha writes this back. He writes this, he says, the religion of God is one religion. Well, now, you know, that's really kind of a blow for people to think, well, it's many religions. He says the religion of God is one, but it must ever be renewed, he said. Moses, then he goes on to talk, oh, this is exciting. He says, Moses, for example, was set forth to man, and he established a law. And the children of Israel, through the Mosaic law, were delivered out of their ignorance and came into the light. They were lifted up from their abjectness and attained to a glory that fadeth not. So it still exists. Still, as the long years wore on, That radiance passed by, that splendor set, that bright day turned to night. And once the night grew triply dark, not doubly, triply, he said, that's really dark. The star of the Messiah dawned, so that again, glory lit the world. Isn't that a brilliant thing? I mean, just think of this message going to this, probably was some woman that wrote, because women used to write out the Baha'i a lot, because they were the ones that had all the questions, and the men, I think, I don't know what they did. They never seemed to write much, but the women asked all these great questions, and we're benefiting from this. Well, so then he goes on to this. He says, our meaning is this: the religion of God is one, and is the educator of humankind. Now he starts to define what religion does. He said it's the educator of humankind, but still it needs to be made new. When thou dost plant a tree, then he gives us extraordinarily beautiful. He said, you plant a tree, its height increases day by day. It putteth forth blossoms and leaves and luscious fruits. But after a long time, it doth grow old, and yielding no fruitage any more. Thus doth the husbandman of truth take up the seed from the same tree and plant it in a pure soul. And lo, there standeth the first tree, even as it was before. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I mean, you know, it's just a wonderful thing to see how Abdul Baha described things in such beautiful ways to make clear a concept that we had to understand, the oneness of religion and renewal and so forth. Then he goes on to say this. I'll just skip down the next paragraph. Religion, this is the answer now. Moreover, is not a series of beliefs, a set of customs. Whoa, well, what is he saying now? Because he's saying what it's not. He says religion is the teachings of the Lord God, teachings which constitute the very life of humankind, which urge high thoughts upon the mind, refine the character, and lay the groundwork for man's everlasting honor. Now, that's something to think about. So it's not a series of beliefs, a set of customs. And I think a lot of people, if you ask them what's religion, customs comes to mind, things like that, rituals, I don't know, formulas, things, I don't know. But imagine saying it's the teachings which constitute the very life of humankind. That's what religion is, which urge high thoughts upon the mind, refine the character, lay the groundwork for man's everlasting honor. I mean, that's what religion is about. Then he goes on and think about the situation in the world right now. He says, note thou, could these fevers in the world of the mind, these fires of war and hate, of resentment and malice amongst the nations, this aggression of peoples against peoples, which have destroyed the tranquility of the whole world, ever be made to abate except through the living waters of the teachings of God? And then he says, no, never. So you see, Abdul Baha is saying to us in this paragraph that I understand this is not going to be legislated out. This is not going to be a political resolution. He says this will never change without the living waters of the teachings of God, ever. Okay. He says, no, never. And he said, and this is clear, a power above and beyond the powers of nature must be needs to brought to bear to change this black darkness into light, and these hatreds and resentments, grudges and spites, these endless wrangles and wars into fellowship and love amongst all the peoples of the earth. This power, he says, is none other than the breathings of the Holy Spirit and the mighty inflow of the Word of God. Wow. Now he's pretty well defined religion, right? I mean, he's telling us it's not to do with bells and whistles and incense, and it has to do with the reconstruction of civilization based on teachings which raise the dignity of humankind, which constitute the life of humankind, which urge high thoughts upon the mind, which refine the character and lay the groundwork for man's everlasting honor. This is what religion is about. Now, it is true that as Baha'is, we know that Baha'u'llah has asked us for things like we should pray every day, and we should observe the fast, and we should follow the teachings of virtue development and so forth. That we understand. And clearly, the religions of God, and the religion of God is a religion in which we are to relate ourselves to our Creator, to in our prayers, to connect with that source of our life. But it is not about our personal salvation that Baha'u'llah is talking about getting to heaven, about somehow reaching nirvana. It's about the social reconstruction of civilization. So the Baha'i faith, the religion that Baha'u'llah has brought to us, and to renew, to restate, to reform, to recast, to reshape, whatever you want to say, has nothing to do about just getting to heaven. It's not about personal salvation, but it's about the transformation of civilization. It's about the redemption of humankind. It's about changing the world, bringing about the kingdom of God on earth. This is an extraordinarily important concept to understand, because those of us that struggle to understand the Baha'i teachings and to live the Baha'i faith every day, which is difficult because the world around us has a lot of different distractions and so forth. But the point that I understand that we're learning in the teachings of Baha'u'llah is that we're bent on building a new world. And we can become sometimes distracted by what happens, and we can even become a little bit alarmed by the events of the day. But it appears to me that everything that's occurring around us is forcing us to become united and understanding what is broken. You see, Baha'u'llah says in the writings that the divine physician has his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease, and he prescribeth as unerring wisdom the remedy. Now, I love this quote, I mean, coming from a medical background, because, you know, traditionally in medicine, long time ago, the concept of putting your finger on the pulse was a way in which physicians could diagnose disease. I mean, that was the thinking. You could tell by the pulse the way it was moving and so forth. So when Baha'u'llah records that in the writings, that the divine physician has his pulse on the fingers of mankind, he is talking about how he has diagnosed the disease. And the disease that is affecting humanity, as we know, is disunity. We completely are disunited. We have not understood our oneness of humankind yet. We have not accepted it. We may intellectually think we agree with it, but we have not fully embraced the oneness of humankind. You know, maybe I've told this on many occasions, but I want to tell you a personal anecdote about my life as a Baha'i. Mame will remember this, and I know she's in the other room, so she'll hear this, but she's heard this many times. Well, we became Baha'is in 4 days. We heard about the Baha'i faith on one day and became Baha'is 4 days later. And then, of course, I couldn't say the word Baha'u'llah, but it just felt right. And I don't think we should ever not trust our feelings. Sometimes our intellect gets in the way. And I'm not suggesting it can be intellectually satisfying, because it's everything satisfying in the Baha'i faith is intellectually stimulating, and it's beautiful. But it just seemed right. That's all I can say. So I remember going to the first Baha'i feast, and I may have told this on many occasions, but I went there loving the world. The world is one and mankind is one, and all the religions agree. You know, the little song we all sing. Well, I got there, and the week before that, I'd been in a Protestant church and heard prayers in English, and everything was quite conventional and all that. And unless I go to this feast, and no one had alerted me to what's going to happen at a feast, because you've only been a Baha'i now 8 days, and you go to the first feast, and there's prayers now in English, Abdul Baha, and some of the prayers of Baha'u'llah. And I found the prayers of Baha'u'llah kind of difficult to understand. I liked Abdul Baha's prayers a little bit better. They were a little simpler to understand, but that was my problem at the time. And then there was a prayer in French. Well, now, you know, I'd never heard a French prayer, and I'm serious. I had never heard a French prayer. Then I'd heard it was a German prayer. And by then I'm starting to feel, you know, I'm feeling quite uncomfortable with this. I love the world, but I really don't like the people very much. And it's going on like this. And then all of a sudden, as some of the Persians will know, there was a Persian chant. Well, folks, that was too much for me at that time. I had never heard a Persian chant. I had no idea what a French prayer was. And all of a sudden I realized that I really didn't like anybody. I just didn't feel right. And now I had become a Baha'i like 8 days before. I felt I loved the world. And then I realized I didn't like anybody. It was a very conceptually confusing existential crisis for me because, you know, when Baha'u'llah says the earth is one country and mankind is citizens, and that we are all the leaves of one tree and the branches and the waves of one ocean. Well, I mean, he's telling us what the truth is. And I'm thinking, wow, yeah, I like the idea, but I don't feel good with it. Like, I mean, you know, there's this feeling and liking and how you think, and oh boy, what a test. And then I thought, well, maybe I became a Baha'i because I hate everybody. Like, I mean, I was trying to rationalize what's going on in my poor brain and so forth. Fortunately, Mame loved all this stuff, not my suffering, I think, but the fact that the Baha'i faith was so beautiful. But anyway, I got through that because I went to another feast and then things got, you know, much more lovely and so on. But I say that to you because I think we often enter into something from a comfort zone. And then in the Baha'i community, Baha'u'llah is saying to us things like, well, now you have to grow up. This is the age of maturity. You can't be clinging to childish dreams and ideas and so forth. And so I went through all of those channels, and it's been a wonderful experience of doing that. Well, let me read to you something else. Okay, now Abdul Baha came to North America, as we all know. He spent 239 days traveling across North America. And he spoke in churches and synagogues and universities, and he spoke to theosophists and, oh God, all kinds of people, and rabbi and everybody. And he kept bringing the message of Baha'u'llah to the North American people. Now, the North American people and Baha'is in those days were probably every one of them was a Christian, at least the bulk were. So he was speaking primarily, I think, to Christians who became Baha'is, and some of them had no idea what was going on, except they really loved Abdul Baha and loved his teachings, and they were really attracted to Abdul Baha. And he kept trying to say, yes, but you have to understand who Baha'u'llah is, because he's you know, my father, and he's the one. Well, anyway, you know the story. And so he spent his life telling people about Baha'u'llah. And so in one of these, this is a talk at All Souls Church in Chicago, Illinois. Okay, May the 5th, 1912, 110 years ago. Okay, and this is what he says. He opens up his talk by saying this: the divine religions were founded for the purpose, and I'd like you to think of what you could answer. So I didn't hear anyone say what that answer was, but he said the divine religions were founded for the purpose of unifying humanity and establishing universal peace. Now, can you believe that? I mean, you would think, well, most people would say, well, religions have come to divide us. No, he said that's why religion came, was to the purpose of unifying humanity and establishing universal peace. So think about that as what the House of Justice wrote about true religion. What is it really doing? What is its intent? Its intent was to unify humanity with all its diversity. We know, because we understand the concept of unity and diversity. But imagine how religion could do that, not divide us into different sects and denominations, but completely bring us together as one heterogeneous group of people, all united with the same understanding of God, and or different perceptions, but still united in wonderful ways. Then he goes on to say in a number of other ways. He says religion is the outer expression of the divine reality. Therefore, it must be living, vitalized, moving, and progressive, he said. If it is be without motion and non-progressive, it is without divine life. It is dead. That's what he said. Wow, imagine. So if we think that religion is not moving, it's not transforming, it's not, see, I don't mean the fundamentals are changing, but the but the expression of religion is not growing, then it is dead. And he was very clear about this, that the purpose of the faith of Baha'u'llah is not for you to become well, you could become a saint if you tried, I suppose, but it's not for your personal growth and development only. It is for the civilization's growth and development. And by you and I interacting with civilization, civilization interacts with us. And there's a social transformation that goes on as we try to apply the teachings of the Baha'i faith in society and on ourselves. I mean, it's a two, and I'm also thinking that the blessings that we have of a Baha'i community is that we have like-minded people who have agreed on fundamentals like Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoki Effendi, those fundamentals, and the House of Justice. But we're all very different people, and we have different understandings, and we perceive things differently, and we come together in a way in which we're trying to unite ourselves in our views and our thoughts. And you know that beautiful prayer from the local assembly that we may become one in mind and so forth. It's beautiful. We're not there to contend with each other. We're there to find harmony amongst things with a vast array of thinking and ideas and concepts. This is brilliant. I mean, no one has tried this experiment before, but because no one brought the experiment to the world except Baha'u'llah, this is the new experiment. This is what the new chemistry is about. It's about this unity of humankind expressing itself in a way that we have never seen before. And it's puzzling to people. It is puzzling. It's puzzling to Baha'is sometimes. Probably more so to Baha'is than anyone, because we keep doing it and we keep trying to figure out how we're doing it. But little by little, folks, it seems to be that we may be getting a little bit better at it. You know, some of us, and many of you I know, have been involved in studying the Ruhi Institute and going through the courses and that. This is a blessing because nowhere in the world have people come together to study the holy writings without there being some sort of authority in a way to tell them what they had to believe. No, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, and I don't want to exaggerate. But the point is that the whole Ruhi curriculum is that it brings together diverse peoples. We sit down with the writings, we study them together, we give our opinions, we share with each other our understandings, we grow together. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant. And it doesn't matter what kind of education you've had or lack of education, whether you have a PhD or you've never been to school, we're all studying the same writings. We're doing the same thing. We're trying to understand the word of God together. And we share these things together and we grow together. This is a brilliant experiment. This is not something that separates people. This is something that unites people, you see. So everything in the faith of Baha'u'llah is created to create unity. This is what Baha'u'llah says was a prescription. And so as we're looking at what religion is, when he says it is the outer expression of the divine reality, then we can say to ourselves and to our friends, well, the Baha'i faith is an expression of divine reality. Now you tend to say, well, what is this divine reality? And well, then you can start to quote some of the writings. But I think it's very important to understand that the intent of the faith of Baha'u'llah is the intent is to provide the remedy for the healing of the world, which includes our own personal healing as well. It's not like it's something out there. It's because we're all part of the world and there's no exception to that. So let me read you something else, and then maybe we'll have a little chance to consult or talk about some of these things that I've read. Okay. I think there's a lot of problem, or at least difficulty sometime in imagining that something new has to occur. In other words, does religion have to be renewed? Is there a need for that? I mean, what's wrong with what we already have and so forth? Well, frankly, there's nothing in the world that is in the material world that is not becoming renewed and developing. I mean, the material world reflects progression. Now, you may say, well, a lot of it's probably not unnecessary, and we have a lot of things that regrettably we shouldn't have. But it appears that the material world, if we look back several hundred years, we never had cars, we never had trains. I mean, I can go on and you would want to hear that. But the point is, the material world has developed. And it can't stop. That's the thing. The human mind just keeps creating new possibilities and new inventions and new things. Well, then why shouldn't spiritual things develop too? Why shouldn't we, as we are growing, come to understand things in a more profound way? So, for example, you could say, well, the 10 Commandments are fundamental, and they are. You can't not look at the 10 Commandments and say to yourself, they don't have complete applicability today. But we're talking about a world extraordinarily complex now. So yes, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, applies universally. But then the details need to be sorted out in a lot of ways. How do we apply that? And how do we feel about these things? And how do we change our attitudes for them and so forth? And so when we think about this, I think about it in terms of, okay, how is my behavior changing in relationship to the evolving world and changing world? How do I feel about things? I mean, I don't want to tell you how I feel about a lot of things, but, and I feel saddened to see certain things happening. And I keep wondering, why do people keep doing this over and over again? You would think it would be painful to keep doing it. I mean, you know, as Abdul Baha said, you have tried war for so many years and so long. Why don't you try peace for a while? Of course, if you don't like it, you can always go back to war. But we seem to go, the default seems to be for sometimes to go back to contest and conflict and war. However, the future that Baha'is see, that Baha'u'llah has shown us in the writings, is infinitely glorious. So yes, we're going to go through rough times, and we're going to go through difficulties, and we're going to have to struggle. But it's like I'm always thinking, and not having had to go through this, that the mother that goes through the birth of the child, the pain of it, eventually produces this wonderful creature, this little baby. And so the pain of it itself, even the pregnancy period has been maybe difficult, but then the end result is this beautiful creation that has come into this world out of pain and sometimes great suffering and whatever. But we have created new life. Abdul Baha says in one of these quotes, in one of these writings that he wrote to somebody again in North America, he says, now the new age is here and creation is reborn. Humanity has taken on new life, he said. The autumn has gone by and the reviving spring is here. All things are now made new. Arts and industries have been reborn. There are new discoveries in science. There are new inventions. You see, he identifies exactly what I just was referring to, those things that have occurred. He says, even the details of human affairs, such as dress and personal effects. And then he says, even weapons, all have likewise been renewed. So he had a clear vision of what's gone on in the material world, right? The laws and procedures of every government have been revised. Renewal, he said, is the order of the day. Renewal. And then he goes on to say, and all this newness has its source in the fresh outpourings of wondrous grace and favor from the Lord of the kingdom, which have renewed the people. The people, therefore, he says, must be set completely free from their old patterns of thought. Okay. Now imagine that. And I have tried to do, I've done, what would be my old patterns of thought? Could I identify them? Could I write down a list of them? And I'm pretty sure some of us could do that. We could identify some patterns of thought that could be an intrusion to the unity of humankind. We might say, well, we'll never get better. Okay, that would be an old pattern of thought. We could say, well, you know, the world's pretty messy. It'll never, I don't know. You could write down a number of things. That's an old pattern of thought. And Abdul Baha said, we must be set completely free from the old patterns of thought, that all our attention may be focused upon these new principles, for these are the light of this time and the very spirit of this age. So whatever patterns of thought you may or might not have, or whatever they might be, he says, get rid of them and focus your attention on these new principles. He says, unless these teachings are effectively spread amongst the people, until the old ways and the old concepts are gone and forgotten, imagine, until they're gone. He said, this world of being will find no peace, nor will it reflect the perfections of the heavenly kingdom. That's pretty astonishing. He wrote this in the early 1900s. This is not like yesterday. He foresaw what had to happen. He was telling people before the First World War, he went on and on to tell people what we had to do. And yet people cling to their old patterns of thought. Their old concepts, their old ideas. He says, until they're gone and forgotten, this world of being will find no peace, nor will it reflect the perfections of the heavenly kingdom. Then he goes on to say, strive ye with your heart, all your hearts, to make the heedless conscious, to awaken those who sleep, to bring knowledge to the ignorant, to make the blind to see, the deaf to hear, and restore the dead to life. And then he concludes by saying, it behooveth you to show forth such power, such endurance, as to astonish all beholders. The confirmations of the kingdom are with you. Upon you be the glory of the all glorious. Well, it's quite an extraordinary commentary on where the world is today, and the task before us, and the task before all humanity, really. Because from my understanding of this is not just a prescription to Baha'is. This is a prescription to humanity, that until we give up our old concepts and ideas and our old prejudice, whatever they might be, we will find no peace. And we may say, well, it's really terrible what's happening in the world today is over. And we have to think that possibly, not just possibly, but the reason for this is that we have still lived with our old patterns of thought. We are contentious, we're prejudiced, we have all these things we're carrying with us. It's such a burden. And look at the results of it, what goes on in the world today. So I think I'll leave that, and I'll just come to one other little comment. Some of you may have read in the past, it's a beautiful book, I'm sure some of you have. It's called Revelation and Social Reality. I'm never showing when I'm showing things on YouTube, whether it's reversed or not. Is it okay? Can you see it? Yeah. Revelation and Social Reality is a beautiful book written by Mr. Paul Lample, who, as many of you know, is a member of the House of Justice at this time. But that doesn't mean this book is especially blessed by a House of Justice. This is written by an individual member. And it's a beautiful book. And it's one of my favorite analysis of the world written by a Baha'i, of how he sees things operating and what religion of the faith of Baha'u'llah is about. And I wanted to just read to you something that he wrote, and it's, and again, it says the purpose of religion, he says, however, is not to simply to describe reality, but to change human conduct and create a new social reality. And then he goes on, and this whole book has a lot to do with this whole transformation of civilization and the role that the faith has to play in it and so forth. But the point is that when I read that, he says, when we look at the writings of the faith, in this case, Baha'u'llah's writings and the writings of Abdul Baha, we're seeing a description of the world, and the remedy is kind of there all the way through it. So I'll confess something to you. I mean, I know this is not we don't confess in the faith, but that doesn't mean we don't tell stories. So I'm going to just tell you a story. When I was in Haifa many, many years ago, and I think I've told this story to you, some of you've heard it, but I was meeting at that time with a hand of the cause of God, Mr. Furatan. Now, Mr. Furatan, some of you would have known, and he died many years ago. He was kind of a little man, I just loved him. And if you knew him, you just loved the guy. He was just so animated. And I think about this today and yesterday and the last few weeks, because he really loved Russia. And he went and taught in Russia, in Moscow. And he spoke Russian, and he loved the Russian people, and he loved the Russian Baha'is. And I'm thinking, how hard it would be for him today if he were here with us. I'm sure in the next world he's doing what he can to maneuver things around to make things better. But I'm thinking how much suffering it would be to see the pain that's going on amongst the people of Russia and Ukraine and so forth, when we understand what the remedy would really be. Well, anyway, Mr. Furtan said to me one day, he said, David, have you ever read the Kitab Gone? Now, you know, what do you say to a hand of the cross who looks so nice and sweet? And, you know, and well, all I could say was I've read some of it. Well, which was true. And he looked at me and he said, and I'm saying this to you because I know this had nothing to do with anything except profound humility on his part. He said, I've read it over 90 times. And that was that. And I thought, holy cow, that's a lot of reading. And, you know, that's me. But I was stunned. And he wasn't saying that to impress me. I think he was saying that to tell me how important this book was. And I came home, and then I realized that Shoghi Effendi had said, and I'm just going to paraphrase this, he says, foremost amongst the billowing oceans of Baha'u'llah's revelation ranks, and I'm again paraphrasing, only to this Kitabi Act as ranks the Kitabi Gone. It's the second most important book of Baha'u'llah. Well, I didn't know that. Although if I had read the book when it was given to me, when I first became a Baha'i, which was given to us about a week after we became Baha'is, in the cover sheet of the Kitabi Gone, which they gave us, they quoted Shoghi Effendi saying that this was the second most important book of all the Baha'i writings. I hadn't taken that too seriously at the time. But I have to tell you, folks, I came home from Haifa that time, and I have read the Kitabi Gone many times. And my wife knows this. She says, every year at the fast, what are you going to read? I'm going to read the Kitabi Gone. So for the last, I don't know, 30 years, I've been reading the Kitabi Gone. And I have it underlined so many times. I think I've desecrated the book now. But every time I read it, it seems like it's brand new, which is troubling because I think I should remember something here. But it is a wonderful thing to realize that Baha'u'llah, in that first part of the Kitabi Gone, he talks about progressive revelation. And then in the second part of the book, he talks about the Bab and the coming of him and Baha'u'llah. It's an extraordinary book. It's a great book for Christians to read. It's a great book for anyone to read because it talks about the role of the Spirit of God within humanity and the building of civilization and the coming of the messengers and how we can become obscured from the truth and not see it because of certain social forces and great political leaders and religious leaders dissuading us and discouraging us from looking at things. I mean, it's a wonderful book to read. Anyway, I share that with you because I'm thinking that as we go through this period of the fast and we're reflecting on life and so forth, and we're reflecting on what true religion is, clearly the Baha'is are so blessed to have the writings of our faith that we have. And all the writings are wonderful. I can't say this is better than that. It's just so extraordinary. But I just recount that from Mr. Furtan because he really kind of, in a spiritual way, really kind of spiritually nailed me on that one. He said, you know, I think you should read this, David. And he kind of smiled, and you know, then I went home and started reading it. Well, I wanted to share that with you because that was such a touching moment for me in my life with Mr. Furtan. Well, as we go on in this, a number of years ago, the Universal House of Justice wrote to the youth in Iran. And this was in 2014. I think I have the letter here. Yeah, the 29th of January, 2014. And some of you will remember a number of years ago, there was a number of conferences around the world for Baha'i youth and their friends to attend. They were all over the world. And because the Baha'is in Iran cannot leave and go to places, they have the great privilege of often receiving personal messages to them. I don't mean to an individual necessarily, but to the youth of Iran or the Baha'is of Iran. They're very blessed to have these messages from the center of the faith, the universal house of justice. And in this message to the Baha'i youth in the cradle of the faith, which is Iran, they talk about the youth conferences that have been called throughout the world and so forth. And, basically referencing the fact that there was 114 conferences spanning the globe at that particular time. And they said the conferences were an occasion for the participants to reflect on the astonishing powers and unique capacities associated with the period of youth, and to consider deeply those societal forces that exert themselves on the youth and so forth. It's a beautiful letter. Now, at the end of this letter, there's a paragraph, and I want to read it to you. I don't know if I'm even able to show it on screen share. I might be able to if I can find it.
You should have that capacity.
Yep.
There you go.
Can you see
Yep.
that?
Yep,
Okay.
it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So look, this is the last paragraph in this letter from the House of Justice to the Baha'i youth in the cradle of the faith. So I'll read it because I know the print may not be that large and I don't want to mess it up and get it all. So it says, the world is in travail and its agitated waxes day by day. Well, I sure waxing and agitating these days, that's for sure. With these words did the ancient beauty warn humankind about its immediate future. Its face is turned towards waywardness and unbelief. Such shall be its plight, that to disclose it now would not be meet and seemly. So Baha'u'llah didn't want to tell us what the plight would be, because he said it would not be meet and seemly. Well, maybe we're seeing it right now. And then the House of Justice goes on to say this, because that was a quote of Baha'u'llah. He said, you surely see how throughout the world the light of true religion is fading. So now getting back to the word true religion. Yet you are the very examples of what illumination this light can bring. You are living proofs that religion promotes upright character, instills forbearance, compassion, forgiveness, magnanimity, high-mindedness. It prohibits harm to others and invites souls to the plane of sacrifice, that they may give of themselves for the good of others. It imparts a world-embracing vision and cleanses the heart from self-centeredness and prejudice. It inspires souls to build unity, to endeavor for the material and spiritual betterment for all, to see their own happiness and that of others, to advance learning and science, to be an instrument of true joy, and to revive the body of humankind. It burnishes the mirror of the soul until it reflects the qualities of the spirit with which it has been endowed. And then the power of the divine attributes is manifested in the individual and collective lives of humanity and aids the emergence of a new social order. Such is the true conception of religion set forth in the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Praise be to God that you are ever striving to model your lives after the sublime pattern enshrined in his teachings. We offer supplication at the sacred threshold on your behalf, the Universal House of Justice. Isn't it an extraordinary message? And I was thinking that part of that paragraph, again, one might want to kind of review that over and over again to reflect on what is true religion all about. See, because I think in a world today where we have so many conflicting ideas and concepts and so forth, we may forget that it imparts a world-embracing vision, that it cleanses the heart of self-centeredness and prejudice. I mean, imagine. It inspires souls to build unity. This is what true religion is about. It endeavors the material and spiritual betterment for all. I mean, it's an extraordinary paragraph. So I wanted to sort of end with that for you and leave that message for you and see what you thought about it. And then maybe you might want to reflect on it yourselves in due time and give consideration to it and so forth. Friends, I wanted to end with this one quote, if I can find it, because, you know, we live in pretty troubling times, as we all know. And it's a possibility that, we may get discouraged and feel unhappy, why we should not be happy with the circumstances of the world. But I wanted to read this from the House of Justice, January the 18th, 2019. A heart that has embraced the love for the whole of humanity will certainly be pained when confronted by the suffering that so many endure because of disunity. But the friends of God cannot shut themselves off from the increasing turmoil of a society that surrounds them. They must guard themselves too from becoming enmeshed in its conflicts or falling into its adversarial methods. No matter how bleak conditions may appear at any given time, no matter how dismal the immediate prospects for bringing about unity, there is no cause for despair. Wow. The distressing state of the world can only spur us to redouble our commitment to constructive action. And then they quote Baha'u'llah. These are not days of prosperity and triumph, cautions Baha'u'llah. The whole of mankind is in the grip of manifold ills. Strive, therefore, to save its life through the wholesome medicine which the almighty hand of the unerring physician hath prepared. So I wanted you to leave with that quote and think that, whatever these firesides do, my hope is that as you gather together for them weekly, and whoever is responsible for doing them, the Baha'is of Oakville and so on, it's a blessing, folks, because it's a source of our own encouragement and mitigating despair that we might have, and just looking at the blessed beauty in terms of the future of humankind, praying for the suffering of humankind. But our best answers could be that we would just teach the faith and grow. Because until people are imbued with these new ideas and concepts and teachings, we'll kind of repeat history, as we know. We'll just keep doing the same old thing over and over again. And renewal is the order of the day, Abdul Baha said. So let's renew stuff, let's bring things up to the standard that we require for the day in which we're living in. So folks, that's it.
Thank you, David.
Perfect timing, right, Maureen?
It's always perfect timing with you, David.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that was a wonderful talk that you just gave, and some points, well, so clear. They're simple at the core of the message. I really liked the bit about true religion being a light, and it's being dimmed in today's day. And then the passage went on to talk about what true religion does, what it looks like, because it might be hard to actually see. David, do you have time for some questions?
Sure.
Okay, so friends, would love to open the floor, and so you're free to pose any questions. If you could use the hand function, or if you prefer, you can type questions in the chat to me. My name is Brett and Maureen today. And then I can bring them forward to David. Otherwise, just put the hand button up. So it could be on our topic today of exploring what true religion is, or it could be on other topics that Dave would love to answer. So as I wait for our questions to come in, Dave, I'll say something that's really on our minds these days is sources, and making sure that we're getting information from proper sources. And, if we read the news from crackpot sources, that's the quality of the news that we're going to get. So I noticed you referenced 2 letters from the Universal House of Justice. And if we're waiting for some questions to come in, I mean, that's something that you might want to comment on, like, why do you put stock into that source?
Yeah, well, one thing I think in terms of that's a good question. I think, like, Baha'u'llah talks about the revelation as being the balance. And I'm thinking that when we're hearing things, we have to judge it against what the revelation says too. In other words, I mean, I don't mean just about incidental things which are occurring every day, but there's a need to recognize that the revelation itself, the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and the Bab, so forth, the centers, the messages from the House of Justice, they give us a foundation to look at and measure other things, to look at other things. And I think that, you know, I've often thought that just by looking at anything on television or we read, we'd have to use our heart and our mind to look at it and say, does this make sense? Like, how do I understand this? What is this in light of what the revelation of Baha'u'llah? Because we have to understand, I mean, I understand it to think that there are all kinds of forces out there trying to capture our attention one way or the other. Terrible. We also know that there is human suffering going on. So that's a take and that's a given. There's no question about that. But we also have to be careful that we're not being exploited by things, because the internet is so, I don't know, it's so terrible. It's hard to know what to believe. I mean, I don't mean I don't believe the big things that are going on, but the incidental things. I think we know when Baha'u'llah said the prevailing order is lamentably defective, it is so defective, folks. So, I mean, what do we need more to know? That the suffering of humankind is rampant. It goes on daily, and it's becoming clearer as we see things like a war going on, and we watch. You know, someone was saying this is one of the only wars in which we're getting commercials. I mean, it's unbelievable. We're not just watching the news, we're getting commercials every 10 minutes to sell you something as you're watching violence. I mean, it's unbelievable. But we're so involved in that kind of world that you could find yourself distracted by what is really happening versus what is being portrayed as happening. And again, don't misunderstand me. I know there's a war going on and people are dying. That I know. I just don't think it should be a commercial event, and that's what it's turning into to some extent. And so the real suffering of humanity, the mothers and the fathers and the children and all that are dying, you know, and then you'll get an ad for soap. And then you go back to people dying. I mean, it's distracting for people. So I really read the writings of the House of Justice a lot, the current guidance from the World Center, to help to keep me focused on where we're going. Because in a war, and the war is not necessarily what we're in right here now, but the war is to move forward and to attract people to the revelation of Baha'u'llah, to mitigate the suffering of humankind. You know, I think about this as kind of like preventive medicine too. I mean, some of you may have strong feelings about vaccinations, but folks, again, my personal feeling as a physician is that without vaccinations like polio and smallpox and that, we would have horrendous diseases still on the planet. If we want to prevent human suffering, the vaccination is the revelation of Baha'u'llah. We want people to stop hurting and doing terrible things to each other. So without being trapped into looking at the momentary things which are terrible, I have to keep my head above that water and go ahead with what has to be done, which is to try to bring the revelation of Baha'u'llah to large numbers of people. And it's harder when they're really suffering, because sometimes that distraction of the suffering prevents them from even grasping for the cord of revelation, because they're so hopeless for some people. So anyway, that's the way I view it.
Thank you. I have another question here, and it's dear David Smith, Dr. Smith. So the conclusion is, yes. So the conclusion is that Baha'u'llah has changed the nature of humankind, that he created a new human being. Is this a fair assumption?
No, I think what Baha'u'llah has done, he's revealed the true human being. You see, I think all the things on top, the layers on top of us, has prevented the human soul from manifesting itself the way it's intended to be. Because you see, it says, you know,
I have created thee noble, wherefore dost thou abase thyself? If we're noble beings, why do we behave so ignobly? Why do we behave the way we do? So I think what the revelation is about removing the layers that have clouded the soul, and that the true humankind will become reflected as we get rid of all this debris that's smothering us. So in that sense, no, we have always been created good, right? I mean, that's it. The commentary that we were conceived in sin or evil is not a Baha'i understanding of the human nature. God created us good. We've just messed it up. We've chosen to go in a different direction. And he's come now in this day to rectify that and to give to us the teachings that could remove the layers of debris and stuff that are clouding us from the truth. You know, in the Kitabi Agan, I'm just getting back, not that you should read it, but it's not a bad book. But if you read that, you'll find that the religious leaders of religions have prevented the people from seeing the truth sometime, because the clouds that kept in front of the people from seeing the truth were sometimes put there by people to prevent them from moving, for most people from relinquishing their positions of authority. Now, I'm sure that's not the case of all cases, and don't again misunderstand me, but the point is that it says in the writings of the faith, and again in the Kitab Agan, that the revelation of the revelation is accessible to every human being. You don't need an interpreter to tell you. See, that's the difference. Maybe up till now we needed someone to interpret for us because people couldn't read at one time. They hadn't the ability to do that, and it was the clergy's role to do that. And God loved them; they did it. And without the clergy, we wouldn't have had the Bible, we wouldn't have had the Quran, we wouldn't have had a number of holy books, because there were those people that were that saw in themselves the need to bring the word of God to the people. But then they brought with it interpretation. That's where it started to fall apart. That's where you see thousands of different types of Christian denominations and sects, everyone interpreting things in a different way. You'll never have unity that way. So my understanding is that as we look at what Baha'u'llah said, he is opening up to every human being the right, the responsibility, the privilege of reading his words. And every heart can be touched. Every heart can be touched. Not just the educated or every soul can access the holy writings and feel the love of God in them as we read them. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there other questions that you'd like to ask? You can put your hand up so I could see you and unmute yourselves. It's a big gathering, David. Okay, so there I see Nouri and then Mr. Bahadur. So go ahead, Nouri.
I think Nouri has put her question
Thank
in
you.
the chat. Yeah, would you like to read it?
Yeah, I wrote some part of it, if you like to read, and then I finish it up, because as I was finishing, you said you need someone to ask the question. So
Okay, I'll read this part, Nouri, and then you can say the rest.
Sure.
It seems like a Western mind is surprised about people in some part of the world are living their religion. So when a church-going or Bible reading Bible person, Christian person, okay, you go ahead now, Nouri.
I was trying to rush. Yeah, okay. When a church-going or Christian, I mean not church-going, actually Bible reading Christian, when this person goes to church or reading the Bible, does he or she thinks about living the life, or just going to Sunday class or Bible class and just leave it?
Yeah.
I mean, we are not talking about the part that what the Eastern person, what kind of religion the person is practicing. But as a Baha'i, I like to say that because the religion says science and religion, harmony of science and religion and modern life and progressive life. So that will be another discussion, that how the religion is teaching the follower. But as a, like, yeah, of course, in Eastern part of the world, people are living actually their religion. But according to what they have, I mean, if the leader is talking and telling them, so it's not their fault. It's the way that the religion is, or the leaders are.
Sure.
I think you get my point, I think. Thank
Sure,
you.
I do. And I think you're absolutely correct. So that's why Abdul Baha said religion has to be renewed. You see, yes, everyone lives with what they inherit religion often too, or they, one great population of people, the Jewish people often are Jewish because their parents are Jewish. In other words, look, there's millions of good people, billions of good people in the world. The problem is not that they're not good people, but they don't necessarily know now what to do in the world that has changed and grown and developed. So that's why when Abdul Baha said, I read earlier, said, religion of God is one religion. Okay, so it's not just what's happening in the East or the West, because there's God-fearing people and God-loving people all over the world. But Abdul Baha said, but the religion has to be renewed. New teachings have to come, new concepts and ideas. And if we're living with old concepts and ideas, then we're not able to move with the time. You see, that's the problem. So it's not that anyone is bad. It's just like, for example, if you spent, I mean, one doesn't want to use this as an example, but if you spent all your life in grade 3 and never went on, you'd be really good in grade 3, but you'd be hard to do calculus. There's a point where we have to move. And the purpose of the progressive revelation is this unfolding teaching of God, necessary and required for the day that we're living in. And also the capacity of the people to accept it has moved as well. So for example, in 1968, wasn't it, we moved off and we went to the moon. And halfway to the moon, someone took a picture of the planet Earth. The first time in the world we'd ever seen where we lived, ever. Baha'u'llah 100 years earlier had said the Earth is one country and mankind is citizens. So spiritually, the teaching had been released, possibly even earlier than that by other thinkers and ideas. But conceptually, we had never seen it. If people are still thinking the Earth is not one country, then no matter how wonderful they are, they're living out of sync with the new reality, or the reality, if I can put it that way, of what really is. And that's painful. Because, for example, if I would grow up to think that only certain cultures are the chosen people, and then I find out, in fact, the chosen people is the whole world, then I'm going to have to live differently. So you see where the problem lies. It's not that there aren't good people and God-fearing people and they pray every day and so forth. And they may be far better than any Baha'i is, and I'm saying this frankly. But the social reality has changed. And we're trying to apply teachings which are now relevant to the moment of history that we're living in. We're living with the same teachings that came about several thousands years ago with Moses. But we're trying now to see how we can adapt those teachings to an ever-advancing civilization. So that's really where I understand it. And for a lot of people, they give up on religion because religion has not changed. They haven't even reinvented it. They're still recycling the old, waiting for things to happen. And for some people, for the return of Christ to occur, or the promised one to come. They're waiting for something in the future, which has already occurred. Allah came. So it's a puzzle and a problem. And the result of that is that we have a world in disarray. So I think we should never feel as Baha'is that somehow we are exempt from struggle. We're going to have big struggles because we are still trying to understand this revelation, and we will have to continue maybe for several hundreds of years down the road. But the fact of the matter is, we have to accept that Baha'u'llah came with new teachings. And those teachings are relevant for the whole world, whether it's the East or the West or the North or the South. It's just, that's it. And our job is to do our best to try to carry those messages to the people of the world, not, and even try to be an example of them, I think, because people would want to look and say, is this working? How are we doing this? You know, when the message of the House of Justice in 1985 to the people of the world, I remember the House of Justice saying to me, the House of Justice as a body, well, I have to be careful I don't say this the wrong way, but there was a concern whether they should say this. And at the end of that message, that the peoples of the world, they said, if the Baha'i experience can be of any value, we offer it to you for to look at it. Now that was in 1985. In other words, what they were saying, what Baha'is are trying to do by uniting diverse peoples, is that an example you'd like to look at? See if that works. And the House of Justice offered that to the peoples of the world. They have written to the peoples, to the clergy of the world, as you remember, a number of years ago, and offered to them and saying, you know, you are the custodians of these faith. You are the people who are really influencing the thinking of the peoples of the world. And you have a great moral responsibility to raise the vision of this up a great deal. And it doesn't appear that all the religious leaders accepted this message from the House of Justice with enthusiasm yet. So when Baha'u'llah wrote to the kings of the world, you know, he said, he said the most great peace could come then if they would have accepted what Baha'u'llah was saying, but they'd rejected. He said, well, then you'll have to accept the lesser peace. So I think as Baha'is and as people who are learning about the Baha'i faith, it's not a matter that we're special people, no way, but the message is special. The revelation, no question. This is what the world is searching for. We just have the responsibility to try to live up to it. That's it. And that's a big responsibility, folks. That's a hard one. But I don't think there's no exception. You know, we can't say, well, I'm a part-time Baha'i. I mean, you can say it, but if you believe in Baha'u'llah, then struggle. I mean, Abdul Baha said, strive ye and struggle. So, I don't know if that answered anything, but felt good to me.
Thank you, David. I'm going to let Mr. Bahadur ask his question, and I've been asked if I can stop recording in case anyone wants to ask a question without it being recorded.
This is my Chinese friend.